right, so one of the things that I want to quickly talk about is some of these different compromises that we've seen. And I thought when I was doing some research, I thought that I would just bring these up because we went through and talked about kind of the how we do security and risk management yesterday, and some of the basic principles of that, like figuring out the asset value and some of the other things. We went in and we talked about the CIA triad, if you recall, the IAAA, the difference between due care and due diligence. So that stuff wasn't on your homework last night. We also went through and talked about the different planning for strategic yesterday as well, tactical and operational, if you recall. But when we got down to the roles and responsibilities, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with that, like the data owner and the data custodian. Yeah, and we talked about that. And so it's up to, if you recall, I went through a little exercise about, the who would be the data owner for certain data sets within your organization. Remember, I talked about this thing that I called the superset, and then a subset of that data, and then we got into some views, quote unquote, views and database technology. And so I thought that trying to explain this would kind of set the table for some of the discussions that we had today. We also went over some of the different standards yesterday as well. And, I think that, or at least I hope it was quite meaningful. We talked about COBIT yesterday, as well as NIST, kind of got deep in the bowels of NIST. I gave you a demo, if you recall, of the CSET tool. So then we jumped into the threat modeling, and the two that we typically see on the exam are STRIDE and PASTA. But somebody mentioned about the DREAD, and this one is sometimes used as well. We don't see this as much on the exam, but these are all three, the STRIDE, the PASTA, and the DREAD, are all different types of threat modeling. And you can see the acronym. Somebody thought long and hard about that to try to come up with that cool acronym there. And so at a super high level, I think that it was a good conversation, even if I was just talking with myself. Hopefully you guys got in and saw some things that looked familiar. We talked about this idea or this concept about good cyber hygiene and practicing good cyber hygiene, being able to govern. And I know that sounds kind of regal, but I mean, ultimately, if you're in some of the positions that I bet you guys are in, or some of them that you're going to take your shot at here in the coming months and years, you're going to be making decisions, and there's going to be money at stake for that. And so understanding a lot of these, like we said yesterday, at the 10 miles wide and an inch deep, is super important. You could be right now deep in the bowels of doing the risk management framework and reviewing documents, creating documents, that kind of stuff. Maybe you've been through an ATO. Yes, we have this tool that we use that is called the EMAS simulator. We have a bunch of customers that use EMAS all the time, and so we created this carbon copy of EMAS. If you're familiar with RMF, you probably have heard of EMAS before. So residual risk, whatever's left over, you put it into a corrective action plan. Typically, it's in a spreadsheet like a POAM. We talked about the separation of duties and how it is that people onboard, as well as some of the different service level agreements, if you recall. Then we jumped into risk, and we got into some pretty cool conversations about that. I said the quantitative risk assessment is numbers and money, and we went through some basic concepts with the quantitative risk assessment, like the SLE calculation and the AL calculation. Talked about the spaghetti model. That, I would tell you, I was looking this morning at the Weather Channel, and that Milton looks like it's badass, man. I think it was category 4, but they said it's going to spin up to category 5. But, what do you do? What do you do whenever you're expecting something bad to happen, right? I mean, you talk about being a downer. Well, our business is exactly that, right? Yeah, we do a risk analysis. We figure out, what makes sense and try to give some opinions on it. And so if we can quantify it in a way that's meaningful, we use the numbers and data. And if we can qualify it, then, I'm giving you my opinion based off of, the 20 years that I've been doing this. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do it. One thing that I said yesterday was, the heat map. I typically call it risk matrix as well, but you plot your findings on here to the consequence or impact and the likelihood. So those are things to consider. So let's check out one of these case studies. Anybody remember this one back in 2013 or 2014? Sorry. The Sony's pictures hack. But yeah, this really started kind of a snowball effect here. In this particular case here, everybody, what does Mike Tyson said? He was famous for quoting, and he's famous for quoting it. Whether or not he actually said it is a different story. But he said that everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. As simple as that is, I mean, how true, right? I mean, we can come up with these plans, we can do our due diligence to, try to have tabletop exercises and scenarios and whatever. But when the stuff hits the wall, who's going to actually help with the incident? In this particular case, it took a little bit of time for them to not only patch the software, but also respond to the incident, which ended up being very detrimental to them. So again, security and risk management, talking a little bit about what you're like, Ben, what the heck does this got to do with anything? Well, I'm glad you asked, because how much do you feel like that Tom Holland Spider-Man was worth? And if it was leaked, how much money did they lose there? And, my summation is, now that that's happened, they probably have an internal red team. They probably have an internal blue team. You probably have all sorts of external penetration tests to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I would think that even with, the motion pictures that they make, the movies that they make, that's probably not even the biggest thing that they do. What's the biggest thing that you think that people are trying to hack for Sony? PlayStation. Yeah. Right. And so hopefully it got them to where they needed to be with their security posture. And we haven't really heard anything on the negative side of the wall on that. And, dovetailing that, we haven't heard anything about Steam getting compromised. Talking about PlayStation, we haven't heard anything about Steam getting compromised, or any of the other, like Twitch, or any of the other popular gaming platforms yet. But I'm sure people are out there trying to figure out how to do that. Another case study here that I wanted to just show you, based off of some of my my review, is I remember when this happened, and it was, even though it was 13 years ago, this was right before I was speaking down in Birmingham to the InfraGard chapter down there. If you're familiar with InfraGard, they community partners with the FBI, and so they asked me to come and speak down there. And this had happened right before I went and spoke at the conference. And I remember this was the first time in my life here with the Target data breach, where around Christmas, like December 1st, let's say, just after Black Friday and Thanksgiving, I actually went to Target. And for the first time in my life, when I was paying, I thought to myself, maybe I should pay cash. Maybe I should pay cash because 40 million credit card numbers were stolen. And quite frankly, we've gotten not immune to it, but I think now we've gotten to the point where, if, like I was saying yesterday, if data is the gold of modern day companies, how are you going to protect that? I mean, 40 million credit cards. I don't ever remember getting a Dear Ben letter with credit card fraud protection from Target. I don't know if any of you guys did, but just lessons learned from their perspective. And another one that I have for later on today was just to talk about is Equifax, and not only OPM, all of our personal data, but Equifax, and what a hot mess that was. They not only control credit, but then they absolutely lose control of all of our identities. Yeah, don't get me started on that. So I want to finish this domain up and then jump into some ways that we can recover and some incident response. So give me a few minutes here to finish this up, and then we'll take a commercial break and then jump into some of the goodness in business continuity. And so first and foremost here, I want to talk about the security controls and what does it look like? Well, for many of us that are doing security controls, implementations, whether it's for the DoD or another federal entity, or for your organization or another customer, there's plenty of room for new people. So if you're interested in doing that and doing RMF packages, those are things that you can absolutely look at the jobs that we were looking on cyberseek.org yesterday, and there's tons of opportunities for high-paying jobs with that for cleared federal contractors. But essentially, there's three different types or buckets, if you will, of control classes: technical, operational, and management. For the purposes of the exam, it's what's shown in red here: technical, physical, and administrative. So we'll go through and enumerate those here. So some of the examples of technical controls, I'm not going to sit here and read these to you. I think you guys probably know what some of the controls are with technical controls. Administrative controls, I always think of policies. Yes, security awareness training would be another one, but what kind of procedures do we have in place to onboard people? In addition to that, the physical controls. And when we talk about physical security, I don't spend a lot of time on physical security, and there's a reason why in these boot camps I don't spend a lot of time on physical security. And it's typically because people that take this boot camp usually have a decent understanding already on physical security. So I spend just enough time to be dangerous, but not going deep into the bowels of it. But for our purposes later on, you will see this word right here, the man trap. And what does that mean?
A man trap is an area where you get past one security point, but then there's another one right after that. So you can't, so you're kind of trapped in that one area until you get cleared to go through the next area.
Yeah. Usually we see man traps in banks. Usually that's the number one place that we see man traps. Also, secure facilities, you'll see man trap as well. Some of these control types are then subdivided or the controls are subdivided into different types, which is kind of neat. But oftentimes, it becomes a little confusing. Why do I say that? Well, sometimes the different controls that are put in place can be multiple types of controls. The camera, where would the camera go? Yeah, certainly it could be detective. I would say that it's definitely preventative as well, my opinion. Also a deterrent. You know, my 13-year-old daughter started wearing some makeup, so we were up in was it Walmart, where they have the little TV now that they put you there, and they blink, 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 and says, "Hey, you're on camera." That's a deterrent right in itself. Home Depot, they don't want you stealing the little drill bits and stuff there. You know, the little tiny tools. So they put you on camera and make you aware. I think they actually make a chime, don't they? At Home Depot, there's like a chime or a sound that also comes with it in Lowe's. Yeah, we've actually seen the old cameras that aren't even working anymore. They don't remove them just because some people say that they work well for a deterrent. What about like parking an empty police car on the side of the road? How would that work? Would that be some sort of one of these different types? Good. So I think you guys get the gist here of what I'm preaching as far as these security control. And so each one of them is defined in a meaningful way. And I think at a high level, you may see one of these on the exam, and I'll give you some examples later on today. So these different types of frameworks, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. We kind of went through the risk management framework a little bit yesterday and earlier on this domain. So one that I want to talk about is this octave here. So operationally critical threat, asset, and vulnerability evaluation. And if you actually opened up the hood a little bit on that, the TARA, T-A-R-A, there that you see on the screen, I was talking yesterday about the word superset, and it's not just because I'm a Superman fan, but the quote unquote superset. So like the risk 850 or the risk management framework 853 is like a superset of controls, whereas some of these other ones that we see like Octave and Terra are subsets of those. And almost like I was talking about with the crosswalk, when you apply these frameworks to different strategies to try to mitigate whatever you're trying to do, oftentimes you'll see a lot of crossover within there. Again, this is not a risk management framework class, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through and get on a soapbox because we got a lot of other stuff. You may see one question on RMF, but it's highly unlikely that you'll see a question on it. What do you guys use for security awareness training? Do you use like automated phishing? Know before? Yeah, they're pretty good. And usually it's 2 times a year. And then if you're a cleared federal contractor, you also have to do it with the DoD. And coincidentally, who would have thunk it? Let me type this in. Do you believe that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month? And so I'm sure that there's a campaign that's going on that, with some sort of frequency that you guys typically will see. And one of the things that we're doing here in town, there's a nonprofit organization, 501(c) here in town called Cyber Huntsville, and it has like 200 members. And so on Halloween, we're actually doing a tabletop exercise here in Huntsville. So if anybody is interested, I can give you some more information. And the tabletop exercise will have spooky scenarios that we're going to inject. Some other training topics that we typically will see. What about this one right here? Have you guys ever been, some of you people that have been there for a long time, have you seen anything with social networking on the corporate network? What about other places that you've worked? Do they allow social networking? Like I know the Army says for morale, they keep social networking available. We see that a lot. Where, it gets blocked and then people are upset. We do, like I mentioned yesterday, that we do what's called MSSP. And sometimes we just take over IT too, if they got money. And so we have a bunch of customers, and one of the things with our Unify devices that we put on premise with these companies so we can remote control the network. Those are great devices, by the way. Ubiquity, Unify. If anybody's interested in those, talk to me afterwards. But I love those things. On there, and many of the modern firewalls that are out there, or next generation firewalls like hybrid devices. Typically, what we see is that they are monitoring the specific apps as well, and the bandwidth that gets pushed through the app. So you can actually block specific apps, you can block specific ports. It's very similar to a lot of the other things out there. If they did, that was probably a little while ago. All right, so that's at a high level what I wanted to just kind of finish up that domain before we jump into something new.